Design today is not anymore cute chairs and cars and posters. It's typefaces, it's interfaces, it's video games. Everybody can be a designer, but not everybody can be a good designer. Intuition, of course, is always important. It's important also when you're a surgeon, but you would never want a surgeon to only have intuition. And I think it's not that dissimilar than design.
Hi. How's everybody doing?
Hi.
Thank you for coming out this evening. My name is Yancey Strickler. I'm the CEO of Kickstarter and one of its founders. And we're joined tonight by Paola. Paola, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Paola Antonelli. I work at the Museum of Modern Art, where I'm a senior curator of architecture and design and director of R with the R&D, big R, small d. Yes.
Why small? Why big R? Why small d?
Because it's half of myself, because I'm half a curator and half director of R&D, and then one research assistant. So we do a lot of R and very little D.
What does it mean to be in charge of R&D for the Museum of Modern Art?
Well, when you read the book about Bell Labs, you discover they had, like, I think 15,000 engineers in downtown Manhattan. Well, we're not going to develop the transistor at MoMA, but we're thinking of the future of museums and how museums really can be useful to people. So it's something, it's in a way the place where you can take a little bit of perspective and think of the role of museums in society. And the whole idea behind it, believe it or not, started in 2008 during the financial crisis, because I've always had a chip on my shoulder because people in the financial sector or in the industrial sector are considered really useful to society. And instead, culture is usually considered to be a superfluity, some budgets that you can cut the moment there's any problem or the conservatives come to power. So I thought that during the financial crisis, we could finally show that the kind of progress that the cultural sector, if we may call it that way, provides is slower but more dependable and more humanistic in the long run. So very long-winded answer, but that's what it is. It's about proving that we, museums, schools, cultural institutions, matter to the bottom line.
And so bottom line, so you think about adopting the language that industry uses to justify yourself? Is that part of the strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about creating this kind of dissonance so that people think of us in a different way. Because museums are thought in different parts of the world in different ways, and also depends on the type of the museum. For instance, you have museums like the Met or the Louvre or the British museums. They're almost too historical to fail. They're usually supported by public funding also because they are the reservoir, they're of the patrimony of humankind. Then you have like science museums that usually are considered to be fundamental to the education curriculum. And then there are museums that are based on communities, say the Jewish museums, say the museums of hats. There's one in Italy, so like communities of collectors, communities that are ethnically based, communities of interest. I feel that museums like of modern and contemporary art are the ones that are more in this kind of limbo. They have to prove themselves. So I like to adopt that language because it raises eyebrows and sometimes raises attention and makes people look at us kind of, from kind of small eyes in a different way.
Is being in a place of limbo in terms of the categorization, is that a good thing? Is there an area where you think the Museum of Modern Art should go more towards, or what is its home?
I love it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't pay the rent, it doesn't pay the electricity bill. So you have to be able to be at the same time nimble and able, part of the mission of the Museum of Modern Art is to be about the art of our time. So ambiguity and in-betweenness is really very much part of the contemporary condition. But on the other hand, when you raise funds, you need to, most of the time, give certainties. Certainties of a certain type of program that will educate the world, or certainty of a certain return of image for sponsors, corporate sponsors. So on the one hand, as curators, we're definitely in the business of being able to understand in between states. But instead, as an institution that needs to fund itself because we're completely private, we need to be able to really speak and give messages that are very clear.
How much are you personally a part of fundraising for the museum? Is that a thing you do?
No, I don't do it, but I do. You know, in the sense there's a great development department,
Yeah.
and some curators are more or less involved, but definitely there are some sponsors that I love. Like there's one Korean sponsor that is the most involved in design exhibitions and in design, also in the galleries, which makes a lot of sense because Korea has a real belief, not only sense for design, but belief that design is a force for the future and also a force for the state to prove itself on the international stage. So that particular sponsor, it's a pleasure to deal with them. You know, they understand what I do, they're not demanding impossible things, and they are people that I can have a great conversation about design with. So sometimes I get involved, other times I don't, but in a way, I'm always conscious of the fact that we need to raise our funds. And I'm also part of the planning committee at MoMA, so I know about budgets, and which is wonderful. You know, it's when you have a knowledge of both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a favorite museum?
Well, it's funny, we were just discussing it before. I have a favorite building, and maybe it's also a favorite museum, but as a building, definitely the Centre Pompidou. I've always loved what it is and what it represents, because you know the Centre Pompidou was envisioned and also built in the 1970s as this museum for the people. Right? So you have this gigantic spaceship that landed spat in the middle of Paris without any concern for any kind of fabric, medieval fabric of the city around it. Boom! And it's like a gastrointestinal system for culture. You know, it has all the tubes and the pipes. And I've always loved it because it is so raw and does not glorify or religify culture. You know, so I've always considered that my favorite museum. But then I have a lot of other museums that I love. I love the Science Gallery in Dublin at Trinity College because it also, because it brings together a very approachable idea of science with impeccable design. So it's very elegant but very approachable, and people love and understand what it does. And there are many other, I love museums in general, most of them. Even though I don't spend much time in them. Like another great building is the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. I could go on forever. Then the Museum of Hats is great too.
Yeah, let's talk about the museum.
Great.
Yeah, what's the Museum of Hats? Where is that?
The Museum of Hats is in Piedmont. And it's a museum where you see all types of hats, and then it shows you how hats are made. And, you know, it's like, you know, you love hats. Or there's the Bata Museum in, what is it, in Toronto or Montreal? I can't remember anymore, but it's, where? Toronto, thank you. So it's the Bata shoes, you know, the Czech Republic, you know, the kind of Moloch of the Czech Republic. And Sonia Bata is the wife, it's the widow of the owner, and it's a museum all devoted to shoes. Sometimes very specific museums are great. I love museums that have a strong personality, that don't try to do what everybody else did, but pick something and just represent. You know, I just really love museums like that.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to start by having you talk.
We've already started.
Yeah, we have started, haven't we?
We didn't really mince any words.
Yeah, Paola's wonderful. A big project you've been doing over the past year, I guess, which is design and violence. So this has been a digital project.
It's been digital. Michelle, are you here? It's because Michelle Fisher is probably coming. She's also been working on this for quite a while. It's like a year and a half, probably. Well, Design and Violence started as a proposal for a physical exhibition that was rejected. And you know, in our line of work, you get a lot of rejections, normal, right? You know, sometimes the ideas are fabulous and people just don't get them, and I'm sorry for them, and you let them go. Other times, the ideas are good and they're urgent and you don't want to drop them. So I had a co-curator, still do, Jamer Hunt, And when we got rejected as a physical exhibition, we decided the idea was too good, and we decided to do a WordPress site. So we wouldn't have to ask anybody's permission, anybody's money, we just started. The only thing that we asked was favors of like really great writers that would get the ball rolling. So the idea behind it all stemmed from two things. One was the publication of a book by Steven Pinker, you know, the Harvard scholar, that was called, is called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which is a book that argues that our society is becoming less violent. And I remember reading about it and then reading it, and it's a very serious book, and it's filled with data, and it's impeccable, but maybe it's the idea of violence that has changed. And I couldn't really cope with this idea that society is becoming less violent. And the second fact was the release of the news about the 3D printed gun. And I remember that I was so shocked about it. I was thinking, oh, how is it possible? I was really surprised, taken aback by it. And then after a few minutes, I was irritated by my surprise, because I thought it was very Pollyannish to think. I always go around saying that designers almost take a Hippocratic oath, but it's not really true. I like to say that design, like anything else, can go one way or the other. It can be for evil or for good, and all the shades in between. So I decided to start doing what I know how to do, which is to look at important, serious issues in the world using design objects as a lens. And decided to ask very knowledgeable people to comment on these objects. So we started with Jamer, and then with Kate Carmody, and then with Michelle Fisher. We started publishing every week a different object that has an ambiguous relationship with violence. So from plastic handcuffs to a poster for Amnesty International about female genital mutilation, to the new slaughterhouse redesigned by Temple Grandin. And every time we would ask somebody really authoritative to talk about it. So the first few writers, I will be eternally grateful. The very first one was Anne-Marie Slaughter, the great Anne-Marie Slaughter. And then we had William Gibson, Steven Pinker himself. I mean, they were so generous, and after that we were able to really get going. But like, for instance, Temple Grandin's Slaughterhouse redesign, the commenter, the essay writers was Ingrid Newkirk, that is the president of PETA. And the innovation in this website, in this format, digital format, is that you can ask a question and people respond. And in the case of the Temple Grandin redesign, we had more than 100 comments coming back. So very interesting. And then in some other cases, we had almost 0 comments, so it depended.
Why was this rejected?
I think it was rejected because, frankly, if you think about a museum of art and then a gallery filled with, you know, the AK-47 and a euthanasia roller coaster, I mean, it's a little weird. In a way, I'm not justifying people who rejected me. I would never do that. I'm not so self-loathing. But one of the comments that you hear sometimes when curators speak amongst themselves when near the bonfire is that some curators act as artists and use artifacts and art to prove their own thesis. Yeah, and I'm one of them. So you could see this gallery as being my own and mine and Jamer's artwork. So I can't blame completely the people who rejected it. There are other rejections that I think were completely wrong. But in this case, this project became much more powerful because it was online. And I was against the comments part at first. It was something that Jamer really pushed. And he was right. I mean, I still, to this day, I don't read the comments. He reads them. I'm like, oh, can't be bothered.
Good
but
yeah.
No, that's me. But no, I'm in the wrong. But it's proven to be really a great tool. And right now, I don't feel like I need to do any physical show anymore.
So, like, the AK-47 as an object of design.
Yeah.
I mean, is that about, like, design principles and the physical object? Is it about what it means in the world? Like, how is it that you think about that as a design object?
Well, if you look at the AK-47, it's almost perfect in its design, like, process, just like the Beretta is perfect, right? So if you look at form follows function, the old way to look at design, excuse me, it's amazing. And the AK-47 also has this contemporary quality, which is it can be replicated all over the world. It's easy to manufacture. It's kind of rough, but works. So it has all that. The problem, everything falls when you look at ethics. And ethics is a relatively new introduction in the world of design, believe it or not. There's this man, Victor Papanek, really important for any design person. And he wrote this book called Design for the Real World in the 1970s, a very moralistic and very important book that all of a sudden put a mirror in front of designers and confronted them not only with their mortality, but also with their capability to induct mortality onto others. And he starts the book by saying that there are professions that are more dangerous than industrial design, but only very few of them. So the AK-47, the Beretta, that's what they are. You know, so impeccable from an old school design standpoint, not completely acceptable today.
So does that make it, is the AK-47 a hyper successful design object?
Absolutely.
In that it's killed so many people, and part of that is due to its design?
Absolutely, absolutely. Its design, its replicability, the easy way to fix it, the sturdiness, the lack of precision, but at the same time the resistance. Oh yeah.
What about prison? A prison was another one of the objects that was.
Yeah, there were two different prisons. One was a Supermax, the Thompson Correctional Center, and another one is instead a Scandinavian, lovely place. You know. Looks like the Kickstarter headquarters. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so once again, we were talking about objects that have an ambiguous relationship with violence. So nothing in the book is a straightforward violence. It's always like, when you see the plastic handcuffs, is it about humiliation or is it about safety? Or in the in the Supermax, is it about punishment or is about rehabilitation? So definitely prisons are an ambiguous moment, like borders. There were two entries that were about the border with Mexico. There are all these objects that have this ambiguity. They're at the same time great designs, but also they have very negative implications, or they are meant for good, but they turn to bad. It's like nothing is ever clear-cut, and that's what's important to know as a designer and as a person in general.
In terms of objects of digital violence,
yeah.
I know there's I believe viruses is one. Are there other things that were digital that you thought about digital violence?
Well, okay, we had the Google attack maps for all the denial of services attacks. It's a map that shows in real time where DDoSs are happening in the world. Then we had Stuxnet. In that case, the design was not Stuxnet itself, but it was a visualization of Stuxnet. So, it's quite difficult to explain Stuxnet unless you show really what happened. And similarly, we also had a visualization of the crisis of credit of the 2008 financial crisis. So some things were born digital, other things were digital visualizations of occurrences. But we also had 3 great live debates that came from design and violence. One was they were sparked by objects. So one was about empathy, another one was about eating animals, and the third was, about open source, and it was sparked by the 3D printed gun. And we're gonna have another one, a final one, on May 28th, that's going to be about the open internet, and we're going to use as prompt Stuxnet and the denial of services map, and we're going to have Larry Lessig and Biela Coleman arguing the two sides of the open internet being ensured by either top-down legislation or bottom-up tools for civil disobedience. So it's interesting because, see, what happens here is that these objects of design enable us to talk about really, really serious matters. And that's where I think that museums could do more and should do more in order to prove their relevancy.
So do you consider this one of the most successful projects that you've done? Is this like life flashes before your eyes, a thing that you think about professionally?
Well, it's really interesting because it's hard to measure success when it comes to this kind of cultural enterprises. I'm awfully proud of it. awfully proud of it. And yeah, life-changing for me, definitely. And I don't know, it's like the thousands of people. Actually, I would say that as many people have visited this site as they would visit an exhibition at MoMA, because an exhibition usually lasts 3 months. So is success how many visitors? Is success how it changes practice? Is success what it means for you personally? From all these viewpoints, I would say it was pretty successful. I especially like the fact that it changed the way I think about curatorial practice, because most curators think that they need to have a white box and a physical space and a New York Times review in order to feel themselves doing their job. And I've learned from this that it doesn't work that way.
Well, you gave a talk at, I think it was Rhizome last week, about how to exhibit interfaces in museums, but which is a topic I can understand. But as I think beyond that, and I think about this as a museum piece online, what is the future of that? Like, how do you think about that as a curator? How important is a building as a physical environment, like touching people's senses versus something like this? Are you conceiving projects now, imagining them as like, I'll just spin up a Tumblr or WordPress for this sort of thing? Or I don't know, how viable is that? How real is that?
I could never have this be a success without the building being there and without my colleagues doing Matisse and Picasso. So this project thrives on the authority that is built by the 1929, almost 90 years of MoMA, and by the fact that it has that kind of old school art that people feel they have to go visit as if they were taking vitamins. So I would never belittle the institutional side of the museum. I do this, other people do the Picasso Matisse exhibitions. In the future, I feel that we'll do more and more of this. I have a colleague in particular, her name is Leah Dickerman. She did the Inventing Abstraction exhibition, in which she rewrote the history of abstract art by looking at the networks of people as if it were really a complex system design. And now she's done the Jacob Lawrence exhibition, in which she is connecting the migration series and the history of African Americans in the United States migrating from south to north with today's culture. And it's going to be more and more about being able to use the different platforms at our disposal to achieve the goal that we have set for ourselves, which is to communicate the importance of culture and art to the world, to as wide an audience as possible.
Right. So the Museum of Modern Art is not just a building. It is, I don't know, it's something like...
I like to say that it's gas.
It's gas.
But that's my own. Yeah, I like to...
They haven't officially adopted that.
I think of Ghostbusters.
Yeah. Is this project going to continue? Is there an end date for this project, or is this an ongoing?
It's ending. It's ending May 28th. Actually, we have already ended the posts. The last post was about 2 weeks ago, and it's about the death penalty. And we used as a fictional design object the compound for lethal injection. And we interviewed, the essay is an interview that Michelle Fisher conducted with Ricky Jackson, who was recently exonerated after 39 years on death row. So that is our final post, and that is what we wanted to have as closure. Then the official celebration will be May 28th with the debate, and also, funnily enough, after it was rejected as an exhibition, it was picked up by MoMA as a book. So we're going to have the book come out at the end of May. Also, we're waiting for the shipment to arrive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
Great. That's great.
I know, it's funny, post-digital, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the same time as this has been going on, there's a show that also just opened, a big design show. This is for...
It's not that big.
Not that big.
But it's good.
Yeah, this is for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is? And
So this is for everyone. I'm sure that many of you in this audience know what it comes from. It's the tweet that Tim Berners-Lee, who's the inventor of the World Wide Web, sent out during the ceremony for the inauguration of the Olympic Games in London in 2012. he was talking about the World Wide Web and the internet. It was one more cry for the defense of the internet against corporate interests and privatization and privacy invasions. But we have used it, and I'm saying we because it's my colleagues, it's Michelle and other curators, to talk about design. You know, design today is not anymore cute chairs and cars and posters, which is the very old-fashioned way to look at design. It's also visualization design. It's typefaces, it's interfaces, it's video games, it's icons. And it also is sometimes critical design that is very esoteric and doesn't seem like it has any immediate function. And what we wanted to highlight, that even when it's so esoteric and when it's so sophisticated and detached from the real world, it still is for everyone. So even the most sophisticated and rarefied experiments are meant to push us all towards a better future, hopefully. And that's what the show is about. And it has objects you see here that range from video games to chairs to the OXO good grips, you know, so really for everyone, or experiments, or even the Kikkoman soy sauce. We put it out because it's in the collection, but Kenji Ekwan, the designer of the bottle in the 1960s, died last November, so we decided, no, last January, I think, so we decided to put it out almost like a reminder of how great he was. And so you see here, there's very different objects, and they are all design, and they're all meant to add something meaningful to the world, which is one of the most important criteria for including objects in the collection of MoMA, even though it's so impalpable.
So if you imagine, like, what is the context you're trying to put around something like the @ symbol being within a museum? Like, what is it that you are conveying with that? What is the emotion that you think of? How do you imagine, like, my mom maybe rolling her eyes at that? You know, like,
yeah, but you know,
like, what is the
she
range
might
of those
roll
things?
her eyes, but the moment I tell her the story, she would be amazed, like I was.
What's the story?
It's so beautiful. I don't even remember how it all started. But I remember that I started looking at this beautiful tortellino. It looks like a tortellino. It's like, and thinking about it. And I started researching the history. The @ sign was first found in like monks, handwriting monks, manuscripts. You know, the monks that would copy them in manuscripts. And it was used as a ligature. It was used to fuse in one sign the Latin preposition ad, ad, which meant towards or in relationship with. So Middle Ages, and then you go through history. It always existed in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, especially in Venice. It was used by merchants to talk about at the rate of, so to connect quantity with price. It kept on existing. It was in the typewriters in the US in the 19th century, the first typewriters. It survived throughout the 20th century. It was used by accountants at the rate of. So in 1971, you know, DARPA commissioned BBN, which is this company that was based in Cambridge around MIT, to design the internet, and in particular to also design email. And there was one electronic engineer, Ray Tomlinson, that was in charge of email. And email at first was 2 users within the same computer, then several users amongst computers that were cabled together in the same room. So it was, and you had to write the name of the person, then lines of code that meant connection to name of the machine. And that line was repeated all the time. And Ray Tomlinson looked at the teletype that he was using, saw this symbol, researched it, discovered that it meant in relationship with, connected to, adopted it to fuse, to make a ligature of all those lines of code and connect name with machine. And all of a sudden, this symbol that had resisted for centuries was reborn with the same meaning for the life of today. And Ray Tomlinson's first email was about the symbol. So, I mean, how beautiful is this? Something that resists in the centuries, that is elegant, that is useful, that becomes part of your identity, doesn't require you to redo all the keyboards. It's like, it doesn't get any better, and it's in the public domain. So all of a sudden, you start collecting objects that are in the public domain, so you don't acquire anymore, you anoint as a museum. So it's just such a beautiful story in the end.
How much context do you give around it in the museum? Do you get the sense of the full story, or
Yeah, we write it. We call them the label wars with the education department, because the education department thinks we cannot write more than 150 characters.
Yeah.
No, words. Characters, yeah, okay. Words. The characters would be too much. It's a tweet, but 150 words, and instead, in this particular case of the @ the label is a little long, but it's worth it.
That's great.
Yeah.
You mentioned Larry Lessig before, and we invited you to sort of curate an email that we send out a couple times a week, and one of the things that you curated was a talk Larry gave about reimagining politics, and it's a TED Talk that he did, and he talks about Kickstarter, and he created a thing called the Mayday PAC through it. I was curious how you think of that as being a part of the world of design.
I don't necessarily think of it as being a direct part of the world of design, but design is about the world, and therefore it has to be about politics, it has to be about economics, it has to be about philosophy, about medicine. In Italy, we have this beautiful word, which is tuttologia, which means the knowledge of everything. Like, it's this beautiful, being able to kind of chat about everything that you don't know, and kind of having an opinion or listening to other people's opinion, being polemic. People talk over each other a lot in Italy. So
passion, a lot of passion.
Whatever, just like, they like to talk. We like to talk. But I believe that designers should be really, maybe not involved, but at least appreciative of politics. We were discussing it before. I always find it very funny that in the United States it's almost rude to talk about politics at dinner, or religion, or in Italy you talk football, politics, and religion at the dinner table. So it's the most fun thing that you can talk about. And without being facetious, politics is important. It's life. And we should not separate it from our work. It's crazy. And I feel that it's about citizenry today.
I mean, we were also talking before we came out about, you were at the Venice Biennale last week, which you loved. Do you want to talk a little about the show?
So the show is called All the World's Futures. So it's curated by Okwe Weezer, who is originally Nigerian, but really a citizen of the world. Curator, who's now the director of the Haus der Kunst in Munich, but he curated a very important documenta at the beginning of the new millennium, in which he kind of opened up the eyes of the art people to the whole world. He is very politically involved. He thinks that art should be about politics, and the Biennale, in my opinion, was riveting because it showed art from all over the world. You had some famous artists, but some others that were lesser known. And Venice had never seen so many people, colorful and colored from all over the world, just really filling the city with diversity of opinions and diversity of positions. So to me, the connection that art had with politics and has with politics in that biennial was really what I think that art should be about. I know that some people in the art world really were not that happy about it, and I'm still trying to understand why. But that's, to me, the function that a lot of art should have.
Do you feel like there's a limitation of addressing politics in art within the U.S. design world, or U.S. museum world? Is that,
no.
Are there any restrictions on that?
No, I don't think so. I think, some of my colleagues organize and curate amazingly political exhibitions. So I don't think that's the case. I think that sometimes they're not called overtly that way. I mean, if you look at so many shows that are on right now, not only at MoMA, but also at the new museum, they are political.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's the art market in a way that keeps a little bit of a distance. They don't really know what to do with politics.
Right, it's harder to sell.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So another thing that you do and something that you run here in the city is, along, I guess, with your R&D work, is a series of salons that just feels like sort of a living zeitgeist of, design at the moment. how long have those been going? What was the last one about, and what's the next one about?
Well, complete disclosure, Yancey participated in one, and it was really quite great. It was the Object Offline. So the R&D salons started also, I guess, 2 years ago. They are small gatherings. They're pretty much as big as this theater, and I usually have 4 people, and we address a topic in which the museum has some sort of expertise or knowledge, but it's also relevant to the outside world. And we cover topics that range from taboos to culture and metrics, because you never can measure the success of culture, and so it's a big dilemma. We address philanthropy, conferences, and the one that Yancey participated in was one of a series of 3 about the object, about how objects have changed. One was called the Object Online, objects that start physical and then go online. Then the one that Yancey was in was the Object Offline, which are objects that are born digital or are funded digitally and then become real in the real world, and then was the Object Connected. The last one that we did was about the algorithm, and it went really, really well. It was pretty great because we managed to have a rather sophisticated discussion in that people are invited in the audience, and they tend to be people that could be amongst the 4 speakers, so there's not that disparity of preparation or just like loquacity, but also the people that are SVPs get a reading list, and it's funny because I've discovered that if people have to work and do homework, they come with more enthusiasm and they like it better. So in a way, the conversation becomes really great. And the 4 people tend to be very different and diverse in the way they approach the subject. Like I remember the first salon was about curation. So the 4 people, there was a pure blood pedigree curator, the chief curator of painting and sculpture at MoMA. Hey, Ann Temkin, right? Then there was Maria Popova, Brain Pickings, you all know her, so curator online. Then there was Jeff Jarvis, CUNY professor, journalist, one of the first to say that journalists today can curate sources. And the 4th, which was the stroke of genius, and it was my husband's, not mine, was Thor Hermansen, who is this, he's part of Stargate Music. They're a duo from Norway that write hits for Rihanna and Beyonce. So it was very different, but we all came to some pretty important conclusions. For instance, curators need an audience. Without an audience, you're not a curator, so it's about that. And then, of course, it's based on trust. Some things that might seem kind of givens, but you think about them in a different way. So these salons, to me, are great because they are, also the algorithm was pretty strong. One of the biggest discussions was about algorithms used in, for instance, music or suggestions, all the online use of algorithms. Where does the algorithm stop and the human begin? There are so many hybrids models right now of suggesting music, culture online that also have a human touch. So it was really sophisticated and interesting.
I'm curious about if you have thoughts about algorithms. And there's a film project that I saw a year ago at the Armory by, I'm going to blank on his name, by Adam Curtis. The BBC
Oh yeah, I saw
it
too. Yeah, it was great.
And a lot was about the algorithm.
The massive attack.
Yeah, and the idea of like the danger of the algorithm is that it takes you in this tunnel of you. I guess it's a little bit of the filter bubble idea, but weirdly there's a lot in that piece about algorithms and a lot of algorithm anxiety. Was that come up? Is that a thing?
Well, yeah, it did come up, and the filter bubble, of course, is something that is always prevalent in our mind. I mean, the fact that maybe your personality as it is today destines you to only know a certain part of reality. But I believe that we're always able to hack the system one way or the other. Right now there's the new book out, The Rise of the Robots, whatever it's called. I immediately get put off by this kind of dystopian views, and I just believe that we're not so stupid that we can hack the system if we need to, even just by finding somebody that's really, really different from us and exchanging, switching. Like, what are your suggestions or what are mine? It doesn't take much.
Yeah. One question I sent to you last night was, what's the worst design interface you experience
every day?
Every day, like
almost
what would you
every day.
What would you change? What is that?
So to me, the most important thing is to be able to leave. I always have my passport with me in my bag, and there's nothing that makes me feel happier than being on a plane. The worst experience is going to the airport here in New York. I'm sorry, it's just amazing, whether it's LaGuardia or JFK, whether you take a car or the bus or the subway. I love New York so much, and I feel sometimes that it's, there are early adopters and then there are late adopters. I don't know what the problem is with this city. I remember when Easy Pass was introduced, it already existed everywhere in the world for the past 15 years. And then it came here, I'm like, oh, Easy Pass. The air train, right? And it's still a mess. Yeah. So I think that's the worst experience.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
The other question I asked you was just, what was the first moment of awareness in your life of something being designed? Like, when did you perceive something is not the natural order, but another human being constructed this?
Well, see, that's interesting because one good thing about being in Italy is that design is the natural order. And I'm not saying it in any coy way, but when you asked me, I thought about it. I kind of closed my eyes, and I remembered waking up one morning when I was about 4, and my dad's best friend from Mexico City had come with a Fisher-Price box from the United States. To me, it seemed huge, but probably was this big. I was 4. And inside, it had this circus, so it was all of these different marionettes that had the body that was wood, and the head, it was wood, kind of profiled. But then the arms and the legs were hinged and were plastics. And the hands had this kind of section that enabled both the clown and the trapeze people to be on these poles that were given. So I remember the whole construction. And I'm sure that I had Lego already, but somehow Lego seemed normal. And instead, the circus was amazing. So that's what I remember. I remember waking up to that and thinking, this is a feat of design. I didn't know what design was. But.
That's wonderful. Well, we're going to get to questions from people in the audience in just a minute. Maybe as just a last topic before we get to that, I loaded up Paola's Kickstarter profile and was curious to see what projects she has backed. And I don't know if there's any here you have anything to say anything about.
Oh my God, the Immersion project is fabulous. I don't remember the name of the artist, but it's great. He found a way to put a camera inside a screen of computer games, and so he films people while they're playing games. It's hilarious. It's so beautiful. The Immersion project. Yeah. Then a very good project. I've always liked that. It's by the founder of Nuka. The company that does watches, and I always loved that. Gaspar and Dancer, well, because Gaspar was my trainer at Equinox many years ago, and then he left and he went back to dance, and I've always supported him. Yeah, let's see what else. Oh, the signage depicting imaginary building uses in New Orleans, that's Rob Walker. And Rob Walker is one of the most wonderful human beings. He's the one that did the Significant Objects project. I don't know if you've ever seen him. It was so beautiful. It was a project online in which he asked people, I did it also once, to go to thrift stores and pick up objects for 2 cents. And then you would give them to him, and he would assign them to really great writers. And these great writers would write the story of the object, and then the objects would be auctioned with the story. And all the money would go to writing programs for girls. I mean, just so beautiful. And he did it before everybody else.
What was the object that you picked for that? Do you remember?
Oh, I picked a few, but there was one object that I wanted to buy, and I missed it, and I will forever regret that, because it was this complete weird rabbit, a rabbit that had it was like Roger Rabbit in a way, in one of its worst moments. I don't know. It was just such a beautiful, beautiful project. But I feel that there's one that's missing, I think,
you also
one.
You also have a page of things you curated, but I want to see where your money's gone. So
my money.
that's what the people want to know.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to open it up to questions. There's a microphone on the right you can go to, or maybe we can pass it to you if people want to raise their hands. But folks in the balcony or down here, questions for Paola?
Oh, there's a balcony.
Yeah, there's a balcony up there. We'll have to give you the full tour. Up front and center. Yes, sir. Sure.
Hope you don't mind if I start with an abstract question.
No.
How much of design do you think is intuition, and how much of it is something that you can actually study? And what do you perceive to be maybe the tension between those two things? I think it's maybe unique in recent times or modern times that we think of design as something that you can study and understand better and then do things deliberately, as opposed to something that seems to be more intuitive.
I do believe that you need to study design to be a good designer and to be a designer. Intuition, of course, is always important. It's important also when you're a surgeon, but you would never want a surgeon to only have intuition. And I think it's not that dissimilar than design. You know, one of the biggest problems with design, and we're discussing it amongst designers all the time, there are all these different people that feel they can descend towards design. Artists feel that they can descend towards design. Engineers feel they can descend towards design. Art curators feel they know design because they learned art history. It's not true, but it's ultimately our responsibility as design people to stand our ground. I don't know how long it'll take, but there's definitely a design education. There's a curriculum, there's a knowledge, there's an experience, a skill that make a big difference. Thank you.
Over here.
Hi, and
Hi.
thank you. A lot of your discussion today was about creating conversations, about design topics, about curation, about things that happen in the world through design objects. And I was just wondering what you thought the role of academia was in that. How does the museum or the museum community feed off of universities and students and the curation that's being done there and the discussions that come up amongst those programs as well?
We are very close. You know, and the same curator that I was talking about before, Leah is quite special. She is pushing this whole initiative about scholarship, digital scholarship. Of course, there's the whole digital humanities field that is much more developed in Europe. But in the case of Leah, she's really an academic, she's a scholar, and she wants that kind of scholarship not to be left behind as the world is moving. As far as I am concerned, I am always very attentive to schools, especially certain schools. I always try to make trips to go see end-of-year shows. There are some schools that I particularly love. One is the Royal College of Art in London, the Eindhoven Academy of Art and Design, but then also here, Parsons, ITP, the MIT Media Lab. So I'm always really mindful and careful, and I try to go to the shows as much as possible. The discourse in design is not as developed as it is in architecture or in art, but it is hefty enough and very interesting. It's mostly about critical and speculative design. There's a lot of discussion happening there. It's about the new disciplines. It's about the ethics of biodesign. So there's a lot that as curators we need to be knowledgeable of, and the only way to do so is to be in contact with academic institutions.
In the beginning, you started talking about how much you love museums, and then later on, you talked about how in Italy, conversations on controversial topics are sort of the way things are. I was wondering what you think about really controversial museums like the Creationist Museum in Kentucky, whether you believe or not.
Which one?
The Creationist Museum in Kentucky.
You know that I don't know it, I confess.
It's like a biblical museum.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that kind of thing, where there's a sort of conflict between science and religion, and on either side of the aisle, there's sort of this boiling mess of emotion.
Free speech is free speech, and I feel that what is very important is that you declare your cards. So I have nothing against it if what you get is what is declared. You know, so so long as there's honesty about it, you know, I feel it's quite all right. Even though I don't know the museum personally, so I don't know what they show. Maybe they show something that is unacceptable, or they are mischievous in the way they explain it. But if it's just about explaining a particular viewpoint that is very conservative, hey, yeah. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
We can talk later.
Okay. No.
You mentioned earlier that when you first heard about the 3D printed gun, you had a strong emotional reaction to it. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, specifically because I had the opposite feeling of many people when I first saw that, which was one of people have been making their own guns using CNC machines and other fabrication methods for quite some time, and this is just another way in which people have found to do something that they've been doing for quite a while. And so I was surprised at how surprised everybody else was. So could you go into that?
Right, yeah. I mean, that's how I feel about genetically modified food. You know, I'm always like, what's the big deal? We've been doing it for centuries, but for some reason, I had not thought about it when it came to weapons. So I was surprised by the immediacy, maybe, of the gesture. And interestingly, when we did the debate that we had, it was Rob Walker, one of the two. So the debate, the motion was about open source. The motion was, we have to protect open source no matter the consequences. And the designer of the 3D printed gun, Cody Wilson, was arguing for the motion, and Rob Walker was arguing against. The interesting thing is that Rob Walker looks more like a crypto-anarchist than Cody Wilson does. So there was this wonderful ambiguity. But truly, I had not. It took me by surprise, the 3D printed gun. So I was amongst all that part of the populace that you thought was really dumb, and I felt that I was dumb, right? So it was really like an awakening.
Any other questions? Over here.
Hi, you mentioned just answering a question about the importance of education for designers, and I guess being somewhere like Kickstarter, so many tools and communities are kind of enabling the sort of everyman designer and putting design tools in the hands of everyone. What sort of impact or influence, for good or for bad, do you think that has on kind of design at large?
It's all good. Everybody can be a designer, but not everybody can be a good designer. And once again, everybody can be a surgeon, but you know, you're not going to give them a scalpel if they're not trained. So that's what I think. I think that experimentation is extremely important, and that there's this beautiful term that John Seeley Brown coined that's called thinkering, which is thinking with your hands. It's fantastic. So every time there's a new technology or every time there's a new way of doing things, there's a big enthusiasm and a groundswell, and you see a lot of crappy stuff, but it doesn't matter. It's all good, so long as it's not taken for anything different than an experiment.
Anything else? Okay. One more.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned at one point that engineers and artists and other fields say that they are designers. And I'm an engineer, and sometimes people ask me what I do, and I say I design stuff, and I guess that's wrong. Could you elaborate?
No, it's not wrong. You could be.
Well,
I mean, some engineers are the best designers, and I think that engineering is a form of design, just like architecture is a form of design. But you cannot think that since you're an engineer, you can design anything. You know what I'm saying? So my problem with artists when they start designing lamps and furniture is that sometimes, this is really interesting. There was a discussion that I had once with Kirk Varnedoe. Kirk Varnedoe was this wonderful chief curator of painting and sculpture at MoMA. He died several years ago. But he was this incredible intellectual. He was so big that he was never threatened by minions like me, and actually we could have the best discussions. It was quite fantastic. And I remember once we were having this meeting with many curators. I'm talking maybe 15 years ago, so I was like a kid. And he said, well, Paola, for instance, you should consider acquiring Donald Judd's furniture. And I said, no way. And he said, what do you mean, no way? I said, it's really bad furniture. It's really bad design. And he said, well, but what do you mean? I said, it's uncomfortable. It breaks your stockings. It hurts you. And it's so horribly expensive. And I said, if you want to acquire it, you can acquire it as art using funds from the painting and sculpture department. And it was really interesting because this discussion is symptomatic. And, you know, Kirk was such a gentleman, and he smiled. And to this day, we have not acquired that furniture, but it might change because I'm losing grounds. But it really is about knowing. I told him, look, if one of my favorite best designers started doing crappy art, would you acquire his paintings? Right, I told him so. And he said, no. I'm like, of course. So why is design lesser or less valuable or less protectable than art? You know, so it's really interesting. If you think about it and you close your eyes, I have tremendous respect for engineers, also for artists, but you know, but I want them to have equal respect for design. That's all.
Yeah. One more question. Sorry.
If you were to curate a show for humanity, a topic on humanity, what design object would you pick?
Only one? No, many.
Many.
Well, there's a show that also has been rejected that is called Broken Nature, that I really would like to do, because it's a show about sustainability, if you wish, but it's not about the kind of atoning sustainability. It's not a hopeless show. It's a show that is very realistic. It's about understanding that we've gone too far and that we've broken a balance with nature that is almost irreparable. Personally, cheerful. I believe in the sixth extinction. We're headed there. We can only design a more graceful ending for all of us, but it is about trying to give back to the world and to nature more than we've taken. So it's about finding objects that are able to have a positive return, not measurable sometimes, but to give you an example, I really love the work of Mary Oxman, who is this amazing architect, engineer, artist from the MIT Media Lab, and she did this silk pavilion that is a pavilion that is built by silkworms. So with her group, she studied how silkworms behave. She put them in a little glass cube and then extracted algorithms from their behavior given certain temperature conditions, light conditions, and also conditions of like circumstantial, contextual conditions. And after she studied that, she set up a framework for silkworms to build this amazing pavilion themselves. So basically, the silkworms, in a completely natural way, dying by themselves instead of being boiled the way they usually are when you make silk, created this completely biodegradable, sustainable, perfectly functional pavilion, right? So it's about that. It's about building at this point by trying to recuperate as much as possible of natural behaviors and building in a way that is more sustainable. And maybe we can feel better about ourselves when we'll become extinct.
And on that note, Paola,
thank you,
thank you so much for giving us your
time. Thanks a lot. Thank
you. To the folks who arrived a little later and in the overflow room outside, I'll come out and say hi. Maybe Paola will as well. Thank you for coming. And yeah, thank you for coming out to Greenpoint tonight. We're having more design-related events throughout the month. I guess the month is almost over. But every month we host a series of talks of different types and different shows in the galleries here at the Kickstarter offices. And you guys are always welcome to come. So please stay in touch, and thanks for coming out this evening. All right, take care.